Welcome to Nurture the Soul and a special webinar honoring Juneteenth 2023, Practicing Anti-Racism from Emancipation to Liberation, to Freedom and Liberation. I'm Reverend Dr. Velda Love, and I greet you in the spirit of emancipation, liberation, and freedom. We are gifted by your presence and inspired that you are joining the UCC's annual Juneteenth celebration and commemoration. Let us pray. Gracious and Holy Spirit, we come acknowledging that our presence is not a moment, but a movement. And the movement does not begin and end with a webinar, a speech, or a way of celebrating our ancestry and our struggles. But a movement is an everyday practice to acknowledge that you are both creator and sustainer, and that in this space you are present with us as the ancestors are. You are present and you are faithful. So lead us as we go through a moment and a movement to hear from an exciting ancestry descendants speaking truth into power so that we can be anti-racist and we can be the people that this generation has been waiting for. Bless our time together. Bless our songs, our music, and the ways in which we show up. And bless this Juneteenth celebration and commemoration. Amen. I'd like to just spend a few moments with you just to go through our Zoom protocols. And you will find that in the chat, there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions. If you have tech needs or questions, please use the Q&A function or the chat function by clicking on the button in your Zoom toolbar and sending a question. We also have closed captioning and live transcript. It is available when you click in the live transcript button in your Zoom toolbar and select Show Subtitle. To make adjustments to the size of the closed captioning text, click in the live transcript button in your Zoom toolbar and again, select Subtitle Settings. While we know that the chat function offers wonderful ways of responding to speakers and building community in this digital environment, we ask that you honor our speakers' presence and reflections by not engaging in extended dialogues or commentaries in the chat. And there we begin. As the Minister for Racial Justice and lead for Join the Movement, the all-church read, and we have been part of a long and engaging opportunity to be anti-racist. I'm also the lead for the Join the Movement, and Join the Movement has an opportunity for us to lean into the all-church read and how to be awakened. I know as I read and listened to Kendi speak, my spirit remains on the path of being both an educator and courageous and fearless and willing to endure the grueling fight against racist power, policies, while educating and journeying with those who commit and recommit their lives to practices towards racial justice. Reverend Dr. Sharon Finema is our Join the Movement curator. She develops outstanding content on the Join the Movement website, and her insightfulness and brilliant passion is to raise consciousness and to publish stories from across the denomination and beyond. You will find them on the Join the Movement website. As you have been engaging in the all-church read, How to Be an Anti-Racist, we have been pleased to also have with us today our partner, the Reverend Dr. I call her Reverend Doctor. She is Dr. Renee K. Harrison. And Dr. Renee K. Harrison comes to us today as our moderator. She is also our resident historian, our scholar par excellence, and the facilitator of the All Church Read videos. If you have tuned in and listened to her voice, not only is she captivating, but she is also quite knowledgeable about the African American experience, its history, its context, and how it presently disturbs our peace. And so Dr. Harrison has superbly framed the chapters and provided historical context for readers and viewers to probe deeply and reflect upon Kendi's words. Her questions help me and others to interrogate and question our capacity to really remain open, reflective, and serious about Kendi's memoir and lived experiences of being Black in America, understanding that history of racial violence is pervasive and lives on in 2023. And I quote, "If I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing all the slaves, I would do that." President Abraham Lincoln wrote this sentiment on August 20th, 1862. He said, "What I do about slavery and the colored race, I do because I believe it helps to save the Union." So on January 1st, 1863, Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation as a necessary war measure. A necessary war measure. According to Reverend Michael Waters, he wrote in an article in Faith and Leadership, Juneteenth is both a cause for celebration and a call to action. Today, we are responding to the call to action. Reverend Renee, Dr. Renee K. Harrison, my blessing for our time together is to honor the lives of our ancestors of African descent who labored on plantations, suffered indignities and dehumanizing violence, yet fought for their liberation and believed their emancipation would sustain each generation. I pray they are peering through the veil to witness our commitment to remain faithful educators, storytellers, griots, and courageous emancipators. Let us welcome Dr. Renee K. Harrison as we learn from and lean into the last 3 chapters of Kendi's book, Failure, Success, and Survival.
Good day, everyone. Let's just take a moment of silence. Will you do that with me? Just one quick moment of silence, because when I hear what Dr. Love has just offered about those that have worked and worked and worked in anticipation of freedom, we are here because they were here. So if we can just take a quiet moment of silence before we get started. Thank you, ancestors, for your labor. I could not help but think of their labors, of the racist backdrop of America, as I read Kendi's book. So I want to share a story with you. I want you to walk with me through this story of Juneteenth. And I'm going to frame failure, success, and survival around Juneteenth as we move through the framing into the contemporary artistic and reflective statements that are to follow. I want you to walk with me, and I'm inviting you to walk with me and think about Kendi's work as you hear the stories that I unveil. I want to thank Dr. Love and Reverend Dr. Finema. You know, I just love working with them in the work that they're doing for joining the movement towards racial justice. Dr. Love always says, Reverend Doctor. So I think it's time for confession. I sat with my Baba yesterday, so I figured I might as well confess that I am a Reverend. Don't tell anyone, though. So here we are with the story at hand. At the turn of 1863, America, it wasn't United States of America at the time, but America was heading into its third year of a bloody civil war. On January 1st, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln issued an executive order, as Dr. Love has said, the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing all persons within the rebellious states. Rebellious meaning those states which seceded from the Union and were determined to keep slavery alive. Now, some states balked at the order, but when some enslavers in Mississippi and Louisiana began feeling the heat of Union control, they quickly fled to Texas, taking more than, guess what, 150,000 enslaved women, men, and children with them. In the Lone Star state of Texas, white owners envisioned a fresh economic start to sustain their standing and lifestyle. But eventually, even Texas could not hold back the Union Army. On May 26, 1865, Confederate General Edmund Kirby Smith, commander of the Confederate Trans-Mississippi Division charged with keeping the Mississippi River open to Southerners, surrendered to Union soldiers. After reluctantly agreeing to the terms of surrender, Smith officially laid down his arms in Galveston, Texas on June 2nd. Approximately 17 days later, around June 19, 1865, as the popular single-story narrative goes, Union General Gordon Granger and his troops made their way to Galveston with General Order Number 3 in hand. The opening line of the order read, I quote, "The people are informed that in accordance with the proclamation from the executive of the United States, all enslaved," well, they didn't say enslaved, slaves are free, end quote. Now, it is often said that in this rendering of the story that Black people in Galveston did not know they were free until the general read the order. And once read, Black folks celebrated at that very moment and each year following. The celebrations in remembrance of freedom from slavery became known as Juneteenth, and celebrations eventually spread to other states. Now, the retelling of the story of valiant white men riding into town with the order in hand to free unaware Black people and Black people celebrating is a neat rendering of the end of slavery in America. But when we peel back the layers of the story, we are faced with the hidden and egregious aspects, because slavery was a violent, debilitating, legalized, and racist caste system in America, sanctioned in some cases by the church. Juneteenth is a day of celebration and remembrance that Black people's story of bondage in America is longer than their story of freedom. And the violent and dehumanizing acts of racism perpetuated on Black bodies from slavery to present far outweigh and outlive anti-racist ideas and actions. To tell the story from the perspective of freedom and not bondage, to tell the story from the standpoint of Granger and his men riding into town to free Black people, is to miss, whitewash, and gloss over how racist policies ingrained in the ethos of America and the institution of slavery led to the subjugation of Black people in the US and eventually a brutal 4-year civil war between Confederate and Union states. A war grounded in racism and states' rights that is still unresolved to this day. You only need to turn on Fox News and MSNBC and CNN to know that it's still unresolved to this day. Failure. Anti-racism fails when we choose not to re-examine history to understand better how race and racism function from a place of power. Power lies in who constructs, shapes, owns, and dominates the story. We fuel that power when we retell and buy into an unexamined story. Both racist and anti-racist ideas, anti-racist stories are necessary to help people come to grips with a more nuanced version of history. And, if desired, to learn or unlearn racist ideas. Yet Kendi reminds us that these racist and unracist, anti-racist ideas must translate into sustaining anti-racist activism and policies. Failure. Thank you, Dr. Kendi, for this section on failure. Now we turn our celebration with reflections on Juneteenth and failure from my framing to Reverend Malcolm, I'm sorry, let me say that again. We turn our conversation, my framing on Juneteenth and failure, to Reverend Michael Malcolm and Reverend Ann Jefferson. Now, who are they? Reverend Michael Malcolm is the executive director of Alabama Interfaith Power and Light and the founder of the People's Justice Council, a nonprofit focusing on environmental justice. And Reverend Malcolm serves as the environmental justice minister for the Southeast Conference of the United Church of Christ. Reverend Ann Jefferson currently works as the director of community life and spiritual care at Pacific School of Religion in Berkeley, my heart, California. Beyond PSR, Reverend Jefferson serves as the associate pastor of worship and liturgy at City of Refuge United Church of Christ in my heart again, Oakland, California, and the dean of education and spiritual formation for the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries. Let us take another deep breath as we prepare our hearts to receive what the Spirit of freedom has for us in these passionate and brilliant servants in this moment. Pause with me and let us hear from them.
Greetings, beloved. I want to start off by honoring my ancestors, mentors, colleagues, and community whose shoulder I stand on and whose hands I hold. I'd also like to acknowledge the Anishinaabe people whose lands I speak from. In chapter 16, Dr. Ibram X Kendi brings attention to understanding that racism has many forms and comes out in many ways. He first starts off with an example of how his organizing failed because of his misconceptions of mobilizing and demonstrating. He also stated that his radical vision was too radical for some because of a misconception of what he deemed uplift suasion. In my circle, we call it respectability politics. He goes on to tell us that both failures were based on a misconception of racism. For Dr. Ibram, racism is not individualized, it is a collective. Racist policies are made by racist people to harm a specific collective of people. These racist policies are upheld and practiced by all. Dr. Kendi ends by calling out fear of losing benefits as the thing that keeps them from challenging these systems. Beloveds, I was born and raised in East Atlanta, which is supposedly the home of the infamous and unnecessary environmental injustice that is Cop City. I must tell you that it breaks my heart to see public officials and preachers who I look up to and who look like me advocating for this injustice being built. I was bothered by seeing the mayor and said preachers together standing to condemn crime while applauding policing in the city, with no mention of the abject poverty or the houselessness problems that exist in the city. It reminded me of the times I saw and heard public officials and preachers condemn their own communities and community members during the crack epidemic. There was an appeal for white approval then, and there is an appeal for white approval now. We should have learned from the history of the crack era that backing racist policies for the sake of appealing to white approval does not work. Racism is driven by fear. I graduated from Alonzo A. Krim Comprehensive High School. I can remember my school being one of the first to get metal detectors and campus police. When I would drive my parents' car in my neighborhood, I would always get pulled over by the police. It was nothing to witness police brutality at the hands of the Jump Out Boys or the Red Dogs or the Black Cats. And these were police units trained to police our communities. These units existed to uphold the racist system. They were oppressing our entire communities. It was not individualized, it was a collective. Many of the same preachers that stood for Cop City stood for these horrible policies. The war on drugs failed our communities in the past, and the threat of Cop City is failing our people now. What if instead of a Cop City, we built a caring center to ensure that those living on the outer margins will know that they are seen and loved? What if we took that same energy that is going into a Cop City and put that into making sure that every family has energy in their home and does not have to deal with the economic oppression of energy burdens? What if instead of wasting resources investing in the carceral system, you invest in those same resources, or you invest those same resources into ensuring that no child has to go to bed hungry, and there is adequate health care for that family? I know what if. If you did that, it would look like you truly are the city that's too busy to hate. It would look like love. Here's where I want to land, beloved. I'd like to land on love as my response. Love is the only thing that can destroy hate. As I sat in the Say Their Name Memorial in George Floyd Square today, I thought about the hate that could fill the hearts of those victimized by police violence on Black, brown, and indigenous bodies. I said I would be well within my rights to hate. However, hatred is the ultimate failure. Hatred robs the individual hating more than the individual being hated. That's where I believe racist policies will ultimately fail. Once we settle our fear of loss, we will find that it ain't as bad as we thought. The reason I experienced policing in high school was because of the fear of white people. They were told that we were violent drug dealers. However, the statistics for the school during my years there would say that there was nothing to fear. The resources spent to police our communities could have been spent to provide assistance to families and individuals in need. There were many of my colleagues who were assisting their families with maintaining their homes while going to school. The carceral system of keeping the status quo is ungodly. As I close, I'd like to leave you with one of my favorite quotes. It's from a German theologian named Martin Niemöller. It says, "First, they came for the socialists, and that I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak to me." Beloved, as always, I offer to you love, peace, and light.
Thank you so very much for that, Reverend Malcolm. I appreciate those reflections and the way they tie into this next presentation. We are going to have, we'll be sharing a song that is part of a suite of selections from a project that I've entitled Love Beyond Margins. We know the power of music within movements to mobilize people, to bring them into harmonious alliance and alignment as we do this work. And when the song is entitled The Peaceful Warrior's Prayer, it's a song that I wrote back in 1986 when Dr. King's holiday became a federal holiday. And one of the things about Dr. King, there have been some updates of the verse, and as I reflected on Dr. Kendi's chapter on failure, I've since written another verse, which you will not hear in this recording, but it draws into account the notion of power, because Dr. King was not killed for his moral persuasion to the hearts of good people everywhere. He was killed because he was beginning to amass power in ways that would radically upset the status quo, radically alter, had the potential to radically alter the status quo in this country. So when we think about the work that we do, as we do it from a place of love that is greater than all of the hate in the world, we still have to ask the questions, who benefits? These are key organizing questions. Who benefits from things being as they are? Whose self-interest is at risk? And whose self-interest can we align with to negotiate power, to shift policies, and to call those in power into accountability? So as I said, you will hear two stanzas. If I could have created a third stanza for this, it would say, "Challenge us, God, to a new way of power. Strengthen our vision for facing this hour, the hour of deceit, the hour of despair, the hour of regression and political snares. Please let us be in Christ a radical incarnation, that we would live out the power of love and the power of organizing and mobilizing ourselves to change the systems." So what I would love to invite you to do is to take a deep breath, settle yourself into this musical prayer, and may it challenge you for the work that lies before you. And I thank you so much for the opportunity to be in this, share in this time.
Because God has anointed me to preach good news to the poor, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim sight to those who cannot see, and to declare the year of God's jubilee, God's favor. It's really time for some peaceful warriors. There's so much war in the world, not just between nations, but between people, between races, between classes and generations and faith paths, religions, and all kinds of persuasions. But God is calling for us to be peaceful warriors, to wage peace, to take time to sit down and have a conversation with someone who has an opposing opinion, to work for justice, to work so that God's table has no barriers to it, that all can come and have communion as the creation. I thank God for the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King. But we are all called to do the work that he did. The job is too big for it to be confined to just one group of people. The pain in the earth is too great for us to exclude anyone from doing the work of God. The need for the covering of God is too large for us not to share it, for us to find ways to come together over a meeting, over a gardening project, over clean energy work. How many peaceful warriors are in the house tonight? Oh, yeah. Challenge us, God. Challenge us, God, to a new way of life. Give us the courage to shatter the night of fear, the night of oppression, the night of injustice, the night of regression. Please let us be in Christ.
Wow, how powerful. Thank you, Reverend Malcolm and Reverend Jefferson. If you were to weave together the framing of failure with Kendi's work and Reverend Malcolm's words and Reverend Jefferson's creative expression, what would come to you in this moment? I want you to close your eyes for a moment and complete this sentence to yourself as you're seated wherever you are. Just think for a moment. If you were to complete this sentence, what would you say in this hour? The Spirit of the Lord is upon me to. I'll say it again. I want you to finish the sentence after the word to. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me to. Good. Thank you, as Reverend Malcolm said, beloved. I love the way he said, beloved. I was thinking about it as they were presenting. I know this is a sidebar. When Don Cornelius says, at the end of Soul Train, some of you may be too young to know what I mean by Soul Train, but, look it up, YouTube it. I don't know, Instagram it, TikTok it. He says, peace, love, and there it is. The third word. So as we move towards success, Kendi writes, neither failure nor success is written. The story of our generation will be based on what we are willing to do. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me too. Are we willing to endure the grueling fight against racist power and policy? Are we willing to transform the anti-racist power we gather within us to anti-racist power in our society? Let me frame that by saying this as I continue from the story of Juneteenth, as I continue in the story of Juneteenth. Historically, the summer of 1865 marks the end of the bloody civil war between the states and the subsequent celebration of freedom on June 19th. Though the terms of surrender were signed and sealed, Black people in various regions of the U.S. were still catching hell. They were still in bondage. Now, what do I mean here? The Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th Amendment were both passed before Granger read the order. Black people were free before the order was even read. White colonists just chose not to free them. Though Congress had passed the 13th Amendment in January 1865, that amendment was not ratified until December 1865. You see, policy changes did little to change the nation's mindset. The nation's mindset held firm to the previous policies that upheld the institution of slavery and the status of Black people in America. You see, Granger rode into Texas with General Order Number 3 in hand, and in the same breath, Texas held off on freeing Black people and did not ratify the 13th Amendment until 5 years later. That's 1870. And other states like Delaware and Kentucky followed suit by not ratifying the amendment until the 20th century. Delaware ratified the 13th Amendment on February 12th, 1901. And Kentucky, thank you, Mitch McConnell, on March 18, 1976. And hold up, Mississippi voted to approve the amendment on March 16, 1995. But that state it wasn't official until just 10 years ago. I'm going to say it again. Mississippi voted to approve the 13th Amendment on March 16, 1995. But Mississippi did not make it official until just 10 years ago. Let me give you the date. February 7th, 2013. I mean, we in the new millennium. I mean, come on. The egregious and illuminating part of the Juneteenth story is that enslavers and pro-slavery advocates blatantly disregarded the Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th Amendment and they chose not to free Black people, instead making them work to capitalize on their labors. Today, in many respects, we are still fighting inequity and battles and dealing with the trauma of slavery and displacement. As one former enslaved Texan woman, Laura Smalley, said, her former master had gone to fight in the Civil War and came home without telling his enslaved laborers what had happened. Smalley stated, and hear her words, "Oh, master didn't tell you no. He didn't tell them. They knew it, but he didn't tell them that they were free." I think he worked them for 6 months before he even turned them loose. He worked them for 6 months before he even turned them loose. Kendi describes what a successful anti-racist future would look like. That is where power and policies would be anti-racist, not racist. There would be equity among racial groups, and racist ideas would be marginalized. But what, I ask, what does that mean in a post-Civil War ratified 13th Amendment world? Are our world's past and present state a foreshadowing of our future? One only needs to look at what's happening right now from January 6th onward. The success of Juneteenth is owed to those who persistently fought for freedom during slavery, a fight that continued through the anti-racist activism efforts of members of the Juneteenth Legacy Project, persons such as Lula Briggs Galloway, Opal Lee, and so many others who fought to turn the tide of racism into anti-racist activism. I asked you at the beginning of this segment to complete this sentence. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me to what? Our celebration continues with reflections on Juneteenth and success to Reverend Matthew Wesley Williams and Reverend Darrell Goodwin. Reverend Matthew Wesley Williams serves as the president of the Interdenominational Theological Center, a historically Black ecumenical graduate theological school located in the heart of Atlanta. Reverend Darrell L. Goodwin serves as the first executive conference minister of the Southern New England Conference of the United Church of Christ. Let us take another breath and prepare our hearts to receive what the spirit of freedom has for us from these passionate and brilliant servants in this moment.
Good afternoon. I bring you greetings from Atlanta, Georgia, in the heart of Atlanta at the Interdenominational Theological Center. I'm grateful to be able to be invited to offer reflections on this celebration of freedom in light of Ibram Kendi's chapter on success. And I must admit that it was impossible for me to visit the question of success without reading the sequence in reverse. And I land on the question of success actually coming through the question of survival. So forgive me for transgressing the categories a bit. But I noticed in the survival chapter, in the success chapter, that Kendi began to make, and actually through the book, began to make analogies to the body politic, analogies of the body politic to a diseased body, specifically around cancer and cancer cells, and found out why, of course, toward the end of the book. I found it particularly intriguing because I too am a survivor of stage 4 diagnosed cancer. That for me is not just a personal testimony, but it also outlines a moment in my life that was transformational, but also expanded my lenses on my freedom dreams and the ways in which we think about these issues of anti-racism, Black freedom, and liberation. And so I come to this conversation both from my testimony as a cancer survivor, 9 years now, thank God, but also having brought that perspective post what I call my healing journey in cancer to the role of president of my graduate alma mater, the Interdenominational Theological Center, which is a historically Black theological school in Afrocentric, historically Black theological school in Atlanta and in the state of Georgia. So I talk about this journey through cancer as healing school. I never talked about it as a battle, never talked about it as a fight. But for me, that diagnosis was probably the most strange gift that I ever received in my life. And what it did was, those who know me know that it changed my trajectory, but also changed the way I tend to eating practices and those kinds of things. But here's the thing, what I share with folks all the time, is that my survival and the practices that were put in place around survival did not begin with food. What I became very aware of on the other side of that diagnosis was that I had some reckoning to do at the spirit level. And the first thing I had to reckon with was whether my life was worth saving. That question about worth was the first of 3 questions that shaped that journey through cancer, which also have informed my journey as a president in graduate theological education, because in both of them, they have to do with the relationship between systems as they show up in individual choices and as they're manifest in institutional structures and policies. And so I follow on Kendi's insight, where he talks about success as a way of uprooting structures and systems by identifying the ways in which those structures and systems have taken root such that we make choices that reinforce them whether we know it or not, right? And so the first thing I had to reckon with as a cancer survivor was, am I worth it? And in order to reckon with that question, what I had to do was to detox and unpack the scores of social, psychological, but also theological messages that I had received and internalized that had me to believe certain things about my worth being tied only to my labor or my production or anything else that could benefit others, but did not bless my own Black life, right? So that was the first question. The second question that I had to address before, in tandem with questions about food, was what are these systems designed to do? I'll never forget being in a grocery store, looking up and seeing that I was in 2 aisles of a large chain grocery store and seeing that I was in a place that was deemed healthy and organic. And I looked around and thought, if this is healthy and organic, what is everything else in here? What are these systems designed to do? And the third question I had to ask myself was, how do I see my body? Is it a cog in a wheel in a machine? Is it in service to a larger system that doesn't give regard for my own individual worth and humanity? Or do I see my body as a divine temple? Am I able to see a body that is a descendant of folks who were denied bodily sovereignty as a precious gift of God that ought to be cared for? Now, those may seem like questions that attend to only one's individual journey, but I found myself moving into theological education having to ask similar questions of the institution and of this enterprise we call theological education, which for us specifically has to do with Black theological education, and the ways in which at an Afrocentric theological institution, which takes up the questions of liberation, of justice, and of peace from an Afrocentric perspective, how might we demonstrate success in an environment and in a field that was founded in a moment where Black literacy was literally a crime? What are these systems designed to do? What do we value and what do we deem having worth? And how do we see our bodies, both institutionally and individually? And so as we came to this enterprise together, and I came to ITC, returned to my alma mater in fall of 2019, we began to ask these questions around the mission, the vision, and the future of the institution, again, in that larger context of a theological field that was shaped in a moment, but in a milieu that saw no difference and no distinction and no discontinuity between Christianity and slaveocracy, right? So as African descended people, how do we begin to take up our own languages and histories and cultures and begin to reinterpret what it means to be in relationship with the eternal? Robert Hood in his wrote a really well-known book called Must God Remain Greek? Or can we begin to see and understand God in the terms and in the tongues of our own people? And so we came at ITC to a way of thinking about education more broadly. It says education is the process by which a community builds its capacity to solve its problems and co-create its future. Anything less is not education, it is mere training. And I must say that this philosophy of education is an inverse statement of Carter G. Woodson's notion of miseducation, which he asserted is a training process through which we learn to master a prescribed canon, where we take on what we've inherited, but never do the necessary work of digging deeply enough, both in the canon and in ourselves, to understand how we might uproot these systems that have taken root in us. So what Carter G. Woodson talks about in Miseducation is that the mastery of these inherited bodies of knowledge, again, derived from a Western white intellectual lineage, foster ways of seeing and being in the world that W.E.B. Du Bois describes as a two-ness or a double consciousness. a strange sensation of seeing oneself primarily through the eyes of others who hold your very being in contempt. And in the latter half of the 20th century, scholars at ITC and other places in theological education and religious scholarship have corrected the canon, building bodies of knowledge in almost every academic discipline, from the histories, language worlds, epistemologies, and orientations of Black and brown peoples. But this is more than a language game. Black theological education at its best pursues perhaps the most fundamental questions that give shape to our liberation efforts and to our success in uprooting these systems. The late professor of homiletics, Miles Jerome Jones, formerly at Virginia Union School of Theology, he defined Black liberation as a new self-understanding in relationship to the eternal. And so if Black theological education is to be a liberative enterprise, this new self-understanding that inherently is anti-racist because it reinforces the value, the worth, and the divinity of Black bodies. It begs the question, how do persons come to understand themselves in relationship to the Creator, to creation, and to community? For us, it takes place in the everyday practices of socioeconomic and political life, in the flesh and blood practices of God's people and God's communities. And so we talk about that work as cultivating what we call prophetic problem solvers, who understand the systems they inhabit and participate in the design of alternatives that reshape our approaches to the work of sustaining Black life, and thereby reshaping the theological underpinnings that drive the systems that we inhabit. So I would say success is the practice of alternatives, that as we practice them room by room, interaction by interaction, course by course, relationship by relationship, policy session by policy session, each of those interactions begins to disrupt the status quo as it operates as an example of the fact that racism is not the law of gravity. White supremacy is not natural law. It is a set of choices that we agree to collectively and we reinforce, often unwittingly, because systems can only sustain themselves to the extent that they set up shop in our souls. And so theological education, and Black theological education in particular at ITC, cultivates the wherewithal to ask and explore the big fundamental questions upon which our life worlds are built. This is the starting point from which to understand the distinctive aims of what we're up to and what's necessary from a theological point of view as expressions of Black determination operating in the lineage of struggle and self-determination that shape our collective vocation. Success is the practice of practicing beloved community, held by community. It's not the work of one heroic figure or Messiah, but it is the work of a community practicing alternatives. So every room, like this room, be it virtual or in person, invites us to the work of prophetic problem solving and sustaining ourselves according to a very different root structure. I'm grateful for this opportunity to reflect with you today on what success looks like and what success requires of us, and particularly in theological education. God bless you.
Brother Matthew Williams, I could just say amen and go sit down for the rest of this talk. My name is Reverend Darrell Goodwin, and I want to begin my remarks with a quote from Toni Morrison's Beloved. And I want you to hear the word they as racism and white supremacy. In this here place we flesh that weeps, laughs, flesh that dances on bare feet and grass. Love it hard. Yonder they do not love your flesh. They despise it. They don't love your eyes. They just as soon pick them out. No more do they love the skin on your back. Yonder they flay it. And oh, my people, they do not love your hands. Those they only use, tie, bind, chop off, and leave empty. So love your hands. Love them, raise them up and kiss them. Touch others with them, pat them together, stroke them on your face, because they don't love that either. You've got to love it, you, and know they ain't in love with your mouth. Yonder out there, they will see it broken and break it again. What you say out of it, they will not heed. What you scream from it, they will not hear. What you put into it to nourish your body, they will snatch away and give you leavings instead. No, they don't love your mouth. You got to love it. This is flesh I'm talking about here. Flesh that needs to be loved, feet that need to rest and to dance, backs that need support, shoulders that need arms, strong arms, I'm telling you. And oh, my people out yonder, hear me. They do not love your neck unnoosed and straight. So love your neck, put a hand on it, grace it, stroke it, hold it up. And all your inside parts that they just assume slop for hogs, you got to love them. The dark liver, love it, love it. And the beat and the beating heart, love that too, more than eyes or feet, more than lungs that have yet to draw free air, more than your life-holding womb and your life-giving private parts. Hear me now, love your heart. For this is the prize. In chapter 17, Kendi offers a vision of success, some of which we've heard. Everyone has more than they have today, where racist power lives on the margins, where anti-racist ideas are common sense. And it depends on what we are willing to do. In August of 2020, the Southern New England Conference of the United Church of Christ called me as their first African-American openly LGBT executive conference minister in its history, and the first African-American executive conference minister in the United Church of Christ. I had achieved success. The mold was now broken, but was it? Was I ready for this setting, and was this setting ready for me? I often say that my call as the executive conference minister was the prophetic imagination of leadership, but realized too soon, too fast, and without preparation. When you are deemed the first, you have to recognize that indeed you are not. There are those who have walked before you, prayed before you, labored before you, done the work before you, and in my family, lineage literally tilled the ground before you. I'm reminded of people like my great-grandmother, my great-great-grandmother, who was a midwife at the turn of the century, who snuck through the woods and the dangerous realities of the South so that she could birth life into this world. And yet she could have been simply killed and cut down because she was Black and woman. Or Reverend Benny Whitten Jr., the first African-American minister and president of the historic Massachusetts Conference, who just recently passed away. And I know yet he also was toiling to prepare the way for me. I would be remiss not to put their names into our minds. So here I am, I serve over 600 congregations, 1,400 authorized ministers, and 110,000 of God's people. I serve in the context that has the oldest African-American churches in this country, and I call one of them Faith Congregational Church, my church home. And yet, are these churches bursting at the seams because of the commitment of the success of what we've done around anti-racism work? I might say no. In the past, when I began my work as the executive conference minister, the first letter I received was a death threat. My first message to the board of directors was not about my excitement, was about safety and security measures to protect my Black body. When I searched for a house in New England with my husband, we were surrounded in signs and towns that declared we support the police in opposition of a Black life mattering. We have been followed by the police and pulled over by the police multiple times. I've been greeted at some churches with the ominous leading question, "Can I help you?" as opposed to "Welcome to worship." I've been bluntly asked questions like, are you the descendant of slaves? And most poignantly, I've been told, I like you because you don't cause me as a white person to feel unsafe. So Kendi says, this change, this success is only dependent, my siblings, on what we are willing to do. And so I offer you this. In the United Church of Christ, we have to be willing to do more than hire or call the first. We have to be willing to do more than to center those things which make us comfortable and center the reality of all of God's people. We have to be willing to decenter whiteness and center those who are on the margins and those who we've deemed to be minoritized. We must see my call as the first executive conference minister of the Southern New England Conference, not as a success and a privilege to me, but as a privilege that my ancestors have gifted to this church. Amen.
Amen. And snap, snap. Thank you, Reverend Darrell Goodwin, and I correct myself in the enunciation of your name. Two questions that Reverend Williams and Reverend Goodwin raise. What are these systems designed to do, and what are we willing to do? To do. Return now to survival. Kendi writes, we can survive metastatic racism. Racist power is not godly. Racist policies are not indestructible. Racial inequities are not inevitable. Racist ideas are not natural to the human mind, to the flesh. Baby Suggs Holy, we welcome you in this space, and we welcome all the ancestors that remind us that even in Kendi's memoir on the individual story that he lays out of his life to tell us about racism, and the individual stories that we offer here in this space, that we cannot forget that the struggle is about our collective efforts towards anti-racism, our collective efforts. You see the fact, I'm going to go back in this framing to the folk at Juneteenth. The fact that most Blacks knew, I'm going to say it again. The fact is, I'm going to reemphasize this. I'm going to push us away from that popular narrative that they didn't know anything till the white man rode into town and told them. The fact is that most Black folks knew they were free and had yearned for freedom for years. One only needs to look at the data. There's enough data out there to support that. And that they had been yearning for freedom and fighting towards freedom decades and centuries before the general read the order. Many had joined the abolitionist cause, served on the Underground Railroad, escaped and risked their lives to help others run, sued their owners, poisoned their owners, paid for their freedom, and purchased their loved ones, and they even fought Civil War. In this process, did they foresee the possibility of an equitable and anti-racist world? Generations of their loved ones had lived, died, and worked during American slavery. For them, slavery and racism had been a 300-year construct, a 300-year power struggle. Now they were free and experiencing slavery post the Civil War, experiencing slavery in other forms and by another name. Did their freedom provide them a glimmer of hope that racism and inequity were, as Kendi says, beatable? Freedom, Kendi says, requires people to fight against all odds. Do you agree with that statement? Freedom requires people to fight against all odds. Do you agree with that? If so, how will you join the movement towards anti-racism? We turn our celebration of Juneteenth with reflections on Juneteenth and survival from two powerhouses, Reverend Dr. Jackie Lewis and Reverend Dr. Danielle Barhuro. I have to say, I met Reverend Danielle just some time ago, and she is truly a powerhouse. Reverend Jackie Lewis is the first African-American and first woman to serve as a senior minister of Middle Colgate Church, which was founded in New York City in 1628 and is the oldest continuous Protestant church in North America. That is powerful. Middle Church is a welcoming, artistic, inclusive, bold, multi-ethnic, anti-racist community of over 2,000 working to heal the world of bigotry and with revolutionary love. That's a big agenda. Reverend Lewis is the author of several books, most recently her work, Fierce Love, A Bold Path to Ferocious Courage and Rule-Breaking Kindness that Can Heal the World. Reverend Dr. Barhuro serves as the executive director and lead CPE supervisor of Sankofa CPE Center, which offers, and I can attest to this, innovative online clinical pastoral education programming along with unique social justice oriented clinical work settings and prepares clergy chaplains for board certification. She is also the director of Movement Chaplaincy for Faith Matters Network. She is the author of Spiritual Care in an Age of Black Lives Matter, examining the spiritual and prophetic needs of African Americans living in a violent world. Let us breathe as we move in this third move from failure, success to survival. Let us prepare our hearts to receive what the Spirit of freedom has for us from these passionate, womanist, brilliant servants in this moment.
Hi, everybody. I'm so glad to have a chance to be with you today in this beautiful space with beautiful, amazing wisdom. So thank you so much. I am thrilled to be talking about Juneteenth with you and what it means to be free, what it means to survive. The first time I read Dr. Kendi's book, I had feelings about it. I was like, what? There's no racist people, there's just racist systems. Wait a minute. Wait just a minute. That is not what I have learned. That is not how I have been trained. Come through, somebody, nod your head at that, right? It's true. But reading it again to prepare for this program, I was so converted to what he's trying to tell us about systems and people and bodies politics. It's very personal for me today to talk about bodies and living and dying and surviving. My dad has been diagnosed with ALS. He's 88 years old. His name is Richard Lewis. He's been declining in his health for about 6 years. And we thought it was because he wore himself out taking care of mom, who died of cancer 6 years ago. He had a diagnosis of spinal stenosis, and no, actually it's ALS. In the last 2 months, he's gone from playing bid whist and talking trash to not really being able to talk and not being able to hold his cards. My heart is breaking, but I'm thinking about what's keeping my dad alive is the kind of systemic, powerful love that kept my mom alive for 8 years after a stage 4 cancer diagnosis, that kept Ibram alive and his wife alive and his ma alive. The way that they were a whole body that was sick and a whole body making each other well. The way they were a whole community, a village that was sick because one was sick. And then they got folks well because the whole body turned its attention. The compassion, the love, the prayer, the power, the travel to the chemo, the ice chips at night, the way my dad's girlfriend, oh my goodness, he has a girlfriend. Yes, he do at 89 almost, okay. But the way she has turned her life into nursing his heart, rubbing his legs, tending to his body functions, feeding him because she loves him. He's still alive because she is loving on him hard. Loving on him hard so he can love on himself hard enough to keep fighting to stay alive. I want to talk about survival today as Ubuntu. I am who I am because you are who you are. Numuntu and Ubuntu and Ubuntu. A person is a person through other persons. Numuntu and Ubuntu and Ubuntu. I am who I am because you are who you are. I am well enough in this Zoom square to do this talk. Worried about daddy because there's love here. There's Grace here. There's Tracy Blackman here. And there's Velda Love here, right? And there's Julian Destasia here. And there's Daniel Buhuru here. There's you've got me so I can be here. And I want to talk about survival as something that we Black people had before we had Jesus. Before we had Christian, we had Ubuntu. When we were in the South African plain before it was a desert and it was a wetland, and we were becoming, because we became first. When we were becoming, when we slithered on the ground and then we got on 4 legs and then we got on 2 legs and we looked up and saw the sky, and we Black people, we the first people, saw the sky and said, oh, this is amazing. This light is for me. This nutrition is for me. How am I going to take care of my tribe? Somebody got to cook. Bob's a good cook. Let's get him to cook. Somebody's a good caretaker of the young people. Let's get Daniel to care for the young people. Somebody is a good warrior. Let's ask Danielle to be the warrior. We are going to be survivors together because we're going to lean on each other's gifts and talents, and we're going to shepherd each other's people and ask each other questions and go together into the night and find the light. Ubuntu. A person is a person through other person. I can't be human all by myself. I cannot survive all by myself. Ibram was not going to get cured of cancer by himself. His wife wasn't going to get cured by herself. And we are not going to cure racism by ourselves. We are going to have to cure white supremacist ideologies together. And the twist I want to make here, I want to do 2 moves real quick. One is Black people. We have got to understand that the container in which we have been raised, the container that is the United States of America, is filled with objects, with terror, with pain, with trauma that is not designed for us to love ourselves enough to even love our neighbor enough. We've got to understand the project of self-love as a serious one. Baby Stokes Holy said it in the cosmology of Toni Morrison, but we're not taught it and we don't teach it to our kids. I'm sorry, we don't. In anger, we call them out of their names. In frustration, we call them fast or sassy or mannish because we can't control them and we can't manage them. Over yonder, those people who don't love our flesh say things to their kids like, baby, do you want Cheerios or cornflakes? They don't say, Mama said, sit down and shut up. They say, let me hear your voice. There is a different cultural context of raising children to be free thinkers, to be risk takers, to be wild hellions. My grandchildren, their parents frighten me. But in this generation, they are climbing on the TV and hanging from the chandelier, talking about, look at me, I'm an athlete. If we're going to love our children in the way that they're going to learn how to love neighbors in the spirit of Ubuntu, we have to examine what we're putting in their environment. Why so much fear? Why so much control? That to me feels like white supremacy is in our houses, raising our babies, teaching them to be afraid of the man and to be afraid of us and to be afraid of their goodness and their sparkliness and their shininess. I want some wild children. I want some love themselves children. I want some dancers. I want some acrobats. I want some scientists and engineers to think outside of the boxes so we can be free. That's my first move. Let's liberate our children to play, to not be fearful, to be bold and brave and risky, and understand that they are absolutely designed by the holy to be fabulous. And then this place of really loving ourselves. Like, gosh darn it, I gained 10 pounds, too bad. I had a bad day, so what? I'm not perfect at work, fine. We've got to look at our own selves as creatures of fabulosity in the spirit of Psalm 139. I am awesomely made in the image of God. And to love myself means to even love the otherness of myself as a rehearsal for loving the other, to love my worst parts, to let go of the holiness, pretend, fake perfection that we think means we've arrived. We will not survive the facade that creates for us. We've got to get real and get jiggy with the unique particularity that each of us is and be that in the world as a gift to the universe. So loving our children with freedom, encouraging them to be their beautiful selves, and loving ourselves so we can say, you complete me. And I've got something to bring to this table of value and of worth and badassery. Yes, I said it. Our survival depends on the freedom we give our babies. And our survival depends on the fierce, ridiculous, over-the-top love we have for ourselves, even on our worst day. That's how we're going to cure the cancer that is white supremacy. Antibodies of fierce love. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Pastor Lewis, for those moving words. Interestingly enough, for me, as I listened to this amazing reflection by Reverend Dr. Lewis, there's a particular word that continues to regurgitate in my spirit. Our brother Kendi highlights, what if we treated racism in the same way we treat cancer? What if humans connected the treatment plans, saturate the body politic with the chemotherapy or immunotherapy of anti-racist policies that shrink the tumors of racial injustice, that kill undetectable cancer cells, remove any remaining racist policies the way surgeons remove the tumors, ensure there are clear margins, meaning no cancer cells of injustice left in the body politic, only the healthy cells of justice. Encourage the consumption of healthy foods for thought and the regular exercising of anti-racist ideas to reduce the likelihood of a reoccurrence. Monitor the body politic closely, especially where the tumors of racial injustice previously existed. Detect and treat a reoccurrence early before it can grow and threaten the body all over again. But But before we can treat, we must believe. What I hear Pastor Lewis inviting us to is a belief that all is not lost for you and me and our society, a belief in the possibility that we can strive to be anti-racist from this day forward, belief in the possibility that we can transform our societies to be anti-racist from this day forward. Racist power is not godly. Racist policies are not indestructible. Racial injustices and inequities are not inevitable. The true question for us in these moments is around our belief. What hinders our gift to believe? Who are the voices that we need to silence so that we may believe? What personal life experiences do you, me, all of us need to deconstruct so that our belief may blossom? Maybe our belief needs to be decolonized. Maybe our belief needs a dose of anti-capitalism. Now, here is where I venture from our beloved brother, Kendi. We have been surviving for so long. What about thriving? How do we shift from simply surviving to thriving, I wonder? Isn't it time for us to do more than simply survive? What does it look like for us to thrive? What does it mean for us to courageously enter into the prophetic call to thrive? Maybe it means deconstructing our desires to want to work for white supremacy institutions. Maybe thriving looks like spiritual entrepreneurship. Maybe thriving says, I won't think that the golden carrot waved in front of me is just to work at the Fortune 500 company. But maybe thriving looks like the prophetic call to be executive director of a social service organization. Maybe thriving looks like starting a business for us by us. Maybe thriving means doing ministry fresh and anew. What does thriving look like for you? In these moments, I call the name of our beloved sister, Audre Lorde. What are the words you do not have yet to thrive? What do you need to say to thrive? What are the tyrannies you swallow day by day and attempt to make your own until you will sicken and die of them, still in silence, still not surviving or thriving? If we have been socialized to respect fear more than our own need for language, the ultimate question that we must all grapple with in these moments, what's the worst that could happen to you or me if we simply weren't afraid to live in truth and live in the spirit of thriving? Thank you.
Wow. So there you have it. Powerful witnesses from failure to success to survival, and a prophetic witness to move us towards thriving. As we come to a close, I want to end with you, you taking the opportunity right now to think of all the questions that have emerged for you. Some of you are converted to Kendi's words, and some of you are still converting. I'm still converting. And so some of you are just trying to figure out where you fit. Wherever you fit, we encourage you to join the movement. We're going to turn our celebration with this final spoken word by Reverend Julian Cesar. Thank you for your time.
See, I want to talk freedom. The other day, I was out riding to get a lineup and saw a young man just sitting under the viaduct. And whether he was living or visiting, getting high or what, I couldn't tell. It wasn't no secret though, that nod, I know it well. Still at the light, watching him, wondering circumstances. What could have happened to get him under there? And then you get to thinking about kids being distracted by bright screens, sugary drinks, too much candy. Sex put in front of them, hormones in the chicken. I grew up drinking Kool-Aid, man, listen. And then we say the problem is parents who didn't do it. Like if he got raised right, he would have went to school instead of stealing your whip and on the highway shooting. Make better kids, that's your solution. So now we got after school programs out there everywhere, but somehow the math still ain't mathing. I was that kid. I grew up in the same hour as him, same time. I don't know how he made it, but I didn't. I don't know how I made it to college, but he didn't. I ran, but he slipped. I rose, but he dipped. I don't get it. Like HBO, I know it's there, but I don't get it. Like I went to Morehouse, so I am a good kid, and we raise our kids to be like the good kids so they don't end up under that bridge. When did success end up as not failing? Our failure has been our definition of success, of thinking we can be more classy than they will find we are good, then they will change their mind. What is this freedom we talking about? How is this free? Tell me, what we really made? Tell me, how is this free if people are still slaves, but we happy because we worked our way inside of the house? No. Don't look away. Don't look. We talking freedom, right? Come on. So we took one from under that bridge, but they put 3 more there. Tell me, is that success? We hold one somebody in the air instead of asking about the policies that put people there. Should we be trying to get rich or fighting to end poverty? Everywhere racism is, we need to be with the same focus that them folks seem to be. Them folk. Not all white folk, but certain them folk who trip over all of this color me and my kinfolk got natural and set up a world to hold us back, laws and everything. So they evil could be legal. So they evil could be legal. So they legal could be regal. They got a bald eagle hoping we wouldn't see through. And make success not living to tear you down, but dying trying to be you. That's evil. The devil over there, that's evil. And evil so deep we can't agree on the answer. A disease so thick that Kendi called it a cancer, going eye to eye with what has made us so sick. Get well, homie. Returning to that boy under the bridge, is it really no sleep that's got him nodding like this? Or did he come from a hood that is stage 4 and everything that happened to him there was made for him? And me making it out was the only mistake. Should I go back or be happy that I got away? The question for every black person here today, for every white glove, we gonna go high, we gonna smile about it, you ain't gonna kill me, yo, we like love. But ain't nothing in this gonna change until we hate. Ain't none of this gonna change until we hate. Quit trying to escape, yo, it's time to get in hate face. Like I see you for real. Till my people get healed, then I'ma be like a drag queen. I'ma be on your heels, Jew Paul. And I don't do pause, trying to get it moving, man. All we do is pause. If you ain't sick of suffering, you still buffering the bun in the oven. What we waiting on? Oven mitts? To them allies trying to be accomplices who live with a different perspective from where the monster is, who get to say with no small pride that you cried when George Floyd died. So no, you not racist. I'm not saying you wrong. I'm saying if you saw me getting robbed and you maybe could have stopped them, but you stopped because you were scared or you ain't want to get involved. Whatever reason you choose, yo, it's cool. But don't be acting like you squad because you saw me getting robbed. You ain't holding the torch, but you could still be in the mob. It's one thing to look at the evil and say I'm not, but to be anti is to actively try and stop it, to really push freedom, to really get active, to look at what's holding me back and push back against whatever. And I mean whatever. I know it's tough, but however big it is, it's not bigger than us. If you don't see that or don't believe that, I'll try again until this cancer we live with finally go to remission. Freedom.
Beloveds, thank you so much for joining us for this Juneteenth commemoration and celebration. We have experienced the powerful voices of those who have come through the fire and the blood. I want to thank you all for staying with us beyond the appointed hour. This is a movement, and so I'm inviting you to join the movement. You heard from our sibling and our brother Julian DeSazier. He gave us the call to action. You heard from Reverend Ann Jefferson. She gave us the call to action. You heard from Reverend Dr. Renee K. Harrison. She provided the context and gave us the call to action. You heard from Reverend Darrell Goodwin. He gave us Baby Shugs and the call to action. You heard from Reverend Michael Malcolm. He called us to pay attention and gave us the call to action. You heard from Jackie Lewis, and we got the call to action in Matthew William Wesley, the call to action. Today, we commit to these calls to action because we are part of a movement that will not stop. We will nurture our children. We will not stop. We will thrive, and we will not stop. And so we thank you for being with us and gracing us with an opportunity for these words to go forth, because the ancestors are pleased. And the bodies, the whole body, needs to commit to anti-racism today and for the rest of your lives. Thank you. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, technician. Thank you, moderator. Thank you. And a blessed Juneteenth.